I'm Eric Marcus, and this is Making Gay History. This season, we're reaching beyond my own collection of interviews to bring you voices from the Studs Terkel Radio Archive. The archive holds more than 5,000 programs that the pioneering oral historian and broadcast legend recorded for WFMT radio in Chicago between 1952 and 1997. If interwar Berlin conjures images of decadence and racy nightclubs, that's partly Christopher Isherwood's doing. His short novel, Goodbye to Berlin, inspired Cabaret, the enduring stage musical and 1972 movie adaptation. My grandmother actually took me to see the film when it first came out. She was mortified by the sexual undercurrents and what she'd exposed me to. She didn't have to worry. I just liked the music and didn't pick up one bit on the homosexual, bisexual, or plain old sexual storylines. Christopher Isherwood was born in England in 1904. From an early age, he chafed at the respectability and rigid expectations of the upper-middle-class society in which he was raised. By his mid-20s, he was itching for a change of scenery. His first novel had flopped, and medical school, which he'd attended for all of 6 months, was a lousy fit. So he moved to Berlin and spent the next 3.5 years of his life there. He picked up prostitutes in the city's boy bars, slummed it with other expats, fell in love, and he wrote. Christopher had always been out to those who knew him, but his semi-autobiographical early books about his Berlin years were vague on the subject of the narrator's sexual orientation. In 1976, Christopher ditched the ambiguity and published Christopher and His Kind, a candid memoir about his life and work in the 1930s. And that's the book he discussed with Studs Terkel in an interview first broadcast on February 10th, 1977. By now, Christopher is 73 years old, an American citizen, a Californian, a Hindu disciple, and, to Studs' obvious delight, a fount of literary gossip and frank reflection. Studs begins by taking Christopher back to his days in Germany.
So there you are in Berlin in 1929. And the question is, what led you to Berlin in 1929?
Well, the immediate reason was that my friend Wystan Auden, W.H. Auden, was there and wanted me to come over and visit him. And I was also very drawn to the idea that I was going to meet a lot of German boys there because, being homosexual, that idea appealed to me very much. And I went over there and spent 10 days or so with Auden. And then I began to think, well, I really would like to go back. I would like to see more. I quite fell under the spell of Berlin. And so later in the year, I came back on my own, having made arrangements so that I could live there at least for a while. And I just found out how I liked it.
And also you were looking for a home. And there's a feeling here of a restlessness. You, of course, were wanting to write so bad. So write you could taste it. But you were looking for not quite England, right? Not quite England.
I really wanted to be on my own.
On your own, yeah.
And as I now realize, more than I did then, I wanted to be in another world where I could speak another language. I wanted my own language, so to speak, for myself while I was writing. But I wanted to have a sort of different persona, as they say nowadays. I wanted to be German Christopher instead of English Christopher.
Is this true, too? Just a question. Being in a different land, a different culture, you as a writer could perhaps know more about your home there than here. Why so many went to Paris in the 20s. Suddenly they realized something about America.
Oh, that's very true, yes. And also, I was strongly persuaded at that time, and indeed I still believe it, that you are a different person in different places. You see, you go to Berlin, suddenly you're a German Studs. And it's very interesting to find out what the German Studs is like.
Yeah.
For instance, I was being asked just now about England and America. And I said that while I'm in England, my American half, after all, I have lived here more than half my life, comes out. But while I'm here, my English half comes out. Mm. Here I always think of myself as English. So I suppose the answer is, I think of myself as a foreigner.
So wherever you may be, you're a foreigner, and yet a foreigner yet at home. A crazy paradox.
Yes,
here.
because you see, I don't mind. I like being a foreigner. I don't feel. I don't understand this thing very well about roots, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, I have roots, very strong roots. I'm very, very British in many ways. But I can replant them anywhere, in a moment.
What's moving me about Christopher and his kind, which you call a revisionist autobiography, was very moving to me as the candor. But over and above that, the good humor. Throughout, there's a joy to it. And you're free. Not that you weren't free then. You always have been sort of a free man, but within limitations, haven't you? Certain things you had to hide.
Oh, yes, that's true.
Throughout this book, we have this aspect of it, which you are so open. I suppose you might call this a liberating book, too, isn't it, in a way?
Well, it's liberating for those who need to be liberating. I don't know. That depends on people. Oh, you mean liberating for me?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, to some extent. It does make a difference. That's a funny thing. I mean, one can feel things and talk about them to one's friends and be perfectly open about them, but actually to print them and see them going out to bookshops and all sorts of people reading them, it does make a slight difference. Yes, there's a slight sense of extra relief. There's a sort of feeling now, really, I'm absolutely, it doesn't matter a bit. I don't have to be the least bit cautious with anybody.
Could you have done this book would you have done this 10, 15 years ago, assuming you had the time and the energy at that time to do it?
15 years ago, maybe not, no. 10 years, maybe so. I should explain to you also, there's another thing involved. There, you see, very soon after my first arrival in America, I got to know this Hindu monk who had a center in Los Angeles, and I became, by degrees, his disciple, and remained so ever since. Now, as far as he was concerned, he knew all about me, including about my homosexuality. And, of course, the Hindus take a very different view of this. They're not moralistic in the same sense. But he had a congregation, and many of the members of the congregation brought with them their kind of Western prejudices, and they were always a little bit worried about me because from time to time rumors used to come about me which reached their ears since I was living right there in the city. And so I did have a certain hesitation in really embarrassing him beyond a certain point. But then as time went on, this became less and less of a problem. And that's why I say that perhaps 15 years ago, quite aside from anything else, I might have hesitated.
Yeah. This is one of those mysteries. How did you come to recognize your foibles? Because it's hard for a person to recognize his own foibles.
Well, I was taught by masters. I mean, Auden told me from morn till eve what all my peculiarities were. He was very outspoken and very candid about them, and he was always telling me that I was this or that or the other. And he decided that I was infantile. But I said, we both agreed, really, basically, that people who are incapable of being silly are really not intelligent. I mean, people who take themselves too seriously, who have sort of, who reach something called maturity or the wisdom of senior citizens or something, that's terrible. That's a kind of death, I think. That sort of, the idea that you grow wise in some way and then can't be silly anymore, can't find anything funny anymore, but it's all, you'll find out something called the truth about life. But the truth about life is, of course, just the same when you're young and when you're old. It's a double-sided affair, life, and to say that it has to be taken seriously is just as silly as to say it has to be taken frivolously.
It's beautiful. Not to be afraid to look like a fool. That is not to be afraid to take risks is what you're saying. And never to lose that childlike, not childish, but childlike sense of wonder, I suppose.
Well, I wish I could say that I could maintain it. This is only a kind of aim rather than rather something that I've succeeded at. But It's the rigidity of not ever being childish or childlike is what is so dangerous.
That's why this book is so beautiful. It is anti-rigid and anti-pomposity, too. I found Auden's poem about Christopher Isherwood here. Why don't you read it? It's about you. Wait.
You know, this was a poem that he wrote in a book of mine, and there's really no other... This is just a tiny bit of it, but I copied it out and sent it to Auden's literary executor. It'll be published, I guess, one day. But this is... He was making fun of me, you see. He says... Who is that funny-looking young man, so squat, with a top-heavy head? He was always talking about my enormous head. A cross between a cavalry major and a rather prim landlady sitting there sipping a cigarette. If absolutely the whole universe fails to bow to your command, how you stamp your bright little shoe, how you pout, house-proud old landlady. At times I can shake you.
So throughout there was this air of self-mockery, kidding.
Oh, yeah. Very
Auden
much,
had
yes.
that too.
Oh, terrific, yes.
We have come to something that is so much part of that time. Of course, the 10 years here, in these 10 years, Christopher's kind, 1929 to 39. These 10 years were, of course, traumatic and cataclysmic and overwhelming years for the world.
Terrible, yeah.
And there you were in Germany.
Yeah.
Now, were you ever, you touch on this, politically committed to anti-fascism, say, as Spender at time in Auden War, particularly when the Spanish Civil War broke out?
Oh, very much so, yes, absolutely. And also, you see, I did have a sort of special, I mentioned that earlier in the book, a special kind of indoctrination as regards the homosexual aspect, because by pure accident, I became a boarder at this house, which involved our going to have lunch every day at the Institute of Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld, who was the great expert on sexology and so on. And he was a man, he was himself homosexual and Jewish, and also leftist inclined. And he was very, very well aware of the fact that the Nazis, even long before they came to power, said Germany lost the First World War because of the leftists, the Jews, and the homosexuals. These three groups undermined her morale and caused her to be defeated. And they were passionately on the warpath against Hirschfeld. They tried to kill him a couple of times. Once they almost succeeded. This was way long before Hitler came into power. Because he was so daring, he went and made speeches in Munich, which was their kind of headquarters and breeding ground at that time. So I did at least get through my head very early one thing, that the Nazis were bad news for me and my kind.
And these are the years, things are popping now. Oh, you also meet the German boys at these places where boys gather to be picked up. And these mostly working class,
yes.
working class kids?
It wasn't, that was really because I had a sort of preference for them. I mean, there were lots and lots of middle-class German boys who were homosexual. But I just so happened, I always felt they were a little bit prissy. I thought they were too sort of dainty. They are... what I liked about the German working class was, as they say in that song of Brecht's, even his Sunday collar wasn't white as snow.
Well, interesting also you imply attraction of opposites here too. The blonde Teutonic, and you, I guess, were a dark-haired young small Englishman.
Yes, there was that too, and then of course I was an upper class Englishman,
upper class.
Therefore, I felt that the working class was forthright and more sort of...
this was kind of a romantic version,
less
too.
Tricky, somehow.
A sort of semi-romantic version, too, to some extent.
Yes.
At the same time, you were socially conscious in that respect.
Oh, yes. I think these feelings I would have had every bit as much if I'd been heterosexual. That wouldn't have made any difference.
Yeah.
I think at this period I would have been drawn strongly to working-class girls. for exactly the same reasons.
Now there's your mother, Kathleen. She was almost an Edwardian figure, wasn't she? Your mother.
Oh, yes, very much.
When did your
Edwardian.
mother recognize your preference that you were homosexual? Or did she ever accept it?
Well, she did and she didn't. My mother was the sort of person who was very good at kind of glossing things over. Yes, she accepted it. But she didn't quite... she said to me once in a moment of candor, she didn't really quite... It didn't seem real to her. Because she really couldn't imagine any kind of sexual act in which a woman wasn't involved. Therefore, I suppose lesbianism would have seemed perfectly natural. Doubly natural to her.
But there was one part you described your mother when it was a German working class kid. Your young friend Heinz, was it? I think was it Heinz?
Yes.
Or she wasn't too crazy. She accepted it. But later on, when a couple of English boys came on, upper class ones, that was different. Matter of class was involved.
That was much nicer. Yes, yes. She liked that. Yes, yes.
There's a very funny story dealing with the marriage of convenience between Auden and Erica Mann, Thomas Mann's daughter. Now,
Yes,
she wanted
yes,
to marry you. Suppose you set the scene for that.
Yes, well, what happened was that she had an anti-Nazi cabaret, and they used to perform in such places as Holland and Belgium, in Austria, which then was not occupied by the Nazis yet, and in Switzerland, and in Denmark. And I was in, at the time, I guess this was in Belgium, maybe Holland, I forget. And she said to me one day, "Christopher, I have something rather personal to ask you. Would you marry me?" And the reason was that she just heard that the Nazis were going to take away her citizenship. And at that time, the law was that if you married a British subject, you became British instantly without any further formalities, whatever. And I had a couple of reasons why I didn't want to get married. One sounds really, truly childish, but it was curiously strong. I was terribly embarrassed at the idea that anybody would think I was trying to pass as a heterosexual by getting married. And so I thought, well, at least I'll see if I can't get somebody else. And I immediately thought of Auden, who was always very adventurous in anything of this sort. And he wired back, delighted. Well, they got married, and that was all right. And the funny thing was that a little while later, when we get to the United States, we went to stay with the Manns. A Time magazine photographer came, and the Time photographer said, "I can understand why Mr. Auden is sitting in this family group, because after all, he's your son-in-law. But what is Mr. Isherwood doing here?" And Thomas Mann answered in German, which everybody understood except the photographer. He said, "He's the family pimp."
You were the matchmaker.
Yeah.
You had arranged it. Perhaps this last, before we say goodbye for now, not that you were less politically, you were not less politically committed, but now fully committed to the idea of, in a sense, liberation of the homosexual.
Yes, and in a more general way, if you ask me what my politics were, I should really say I'm a member of the American Civil Liberties Union. That's to say, I'm a regular kind of liberal, and I'm much more interested in local causes, by and large. I mean, I'm more interested in California politics than in national politics, insofar as
perhaps you may have the answer to a great deal of what is the dilemma today. People looking for some little triumph, some little victory, some little effect of what they do, since they're overwhelmed by other events. And maybe community victories and community matters might, in a sense, extend to the city, to the country, to the world, little victories.
Oh, yes, I know many people whose lives are absolutely enriched by doing these things.
Perhaps you could read this last part. You speak of third person.
Yes.
This last part, in a sense, might be close to your credo.
He must never again give way to embarrassment, never deny the rights of his tribe, never apologize for its existence, never think of sacrificing himself masochistically on the altar of that false god of the totalitarians, the greatest good of the greatest number, whose priests are alone empowered to decide what good is.
By his own admission, Christopher Isherwood wasn't very concerned with gay rights when he first moved to Berlin in 1929. He treated homosexuality as, quote, a private way of life discovered by himself and a few friends. But through his visits to Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute for Sexual Research, he began to discover a broader kinship. By then, it had been more than 3 decades since Dr. Hirschfeld had founded the Scientific Humanitarian Committee, the world's first homosexual rights organization. As Christopher told Studs, Hirschfeld was a gay leftist Jew who became an early Nazi target. On May 10, 1933, the Nazis burned his institute's library along with a bust of Hirschfeld himself. Christopher was there and looked on in quiet horror. He left Berlin a few days later. In 1939, on the eve of World War II, Christopher and his lifelong friend, W.H. Auden, both emigrated to the United States. Auden settled in New York, Christopher in Los Angeles. He wrote fiction as well as autobiographical and dramatic works, and he published translations of Hindu texts in collaboration with his spiritual teacher. When he was in his late 40s, Christopher began a relationship with 18-year-old Don Bacardi, who became a gifted portrait painter. They remained partners for more than 3 decades. Christopher Isherwood died on January 4th, 1986. He was 81. Don Bacardi still lives in the Santa Monica home they once shared. To learn more about Christopher Isherwood and to listen to our Season 4 episode about Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld, please visit makinggayhistory.com. That's where you'll find all our past episodes as well. Many thanks to everyone who makes Making Gay History possible. Senior producer Nahani Rouse, co-producer and deputy director Inga Detaya, audio engineer Jeff Town, researcher Brian Faree, photo editor Michael Green, and our social media team Christiana Pena, Nick Porter, and Denio Lorenko. Special thanks to Jenna Weiss-Berman and our founding editor and producer, Sarah Birmingham. Our theme music was composed by Fritz Myers. Making Gay History is a co-production of Pineapple Street Studios with assistance from the New York Public Library's Manuscripts and Archives Division and the One Archives at the USC Libraries. Season 8 of this podcast is produced in association with the Studs Terkel Radio Archive, which is managed by WFMT in partnership with the Chicago History Museum. A very special thank you to Allison Shine Holmes, Director of Media Archives at WTTW Chicago PBS and WFMT Chicago, for giving us access to Studs Terkel's treasure trove of interviews. You can find many of them at studsterkel.wfmt.com. Making Gay History's 8th season has been made possible with funding from the Jonathan Logan Family Foundation, proud Chicagoans Barbara Levy-Kipper and Irwin and Andrew Press, the Small Change Foundation, and our listeners, including Greg Adgate, who made a generous donation in honor of his daughter Anna. Thanks, Greg. So long. Until next time.